So I was the #1 ranked Bladedancer for the Race to 100 in Last Epoch. Hardcore solo self found 4th overall. And a lot of you guys have been asking me for my build, and I thought I would take the time to go over it. So in this video, we're going to be going over my exact build and how I was playing it. I was playing a typical Bladedancer Shadow Dagger build. And as you can see here, I was running a synchronized strike, shift, decoy, smoke bomb, and umbral blaze. Now there is a little bit of variation here. To give you a brief breakdown of the class and how it's played, it's pretty much like this. So umbral blade is your spamming ability, and you're going to put these blades down right here, and they just linger, and your goal is to just try and get these blades to sit on top of mobs and bosses as long as you can. And you can have up to 3 blades out. There are 2 other ways that you can get these blades out in this build. Number 1, you can use your shift, and that will spawn a blade. The other thing you can do is you can use a synchronized strike, and these clones will eventually explode and turn into blades themselves. Now when you do that, I could also get them to explode manually by either just shifting or using another umbral blade, and it will spawn these blades. These blades also track targets, so as the mobs are moving, they will also move and sit on top of the mobs as well. All of your damage is essentially coming from something called shadow daggers, which you can't actually see on the bar. You don't run it. If I were to go into my umbral blades here, you're gonna see that these umbral blades, or the spinners that you just saw, they apply shadow daggers. And when I have these spinners on top of a mob or a boss, I get a stack. They get a stack of a shadow dagger, which you can see clearly. I'll probably show you in the video right now. And if you get 4 of these stacks, it explodes and it just deals a lot of damage. Now the reason why shadow daggers is insanely strong and powerful is because number 1, all the shadow dagger procs will always crit, and number 2, you're pulling from both melee and throwing attacks. So you can see the scaling is from physical, melee, throwing, and dexterity. And if we go into the stats, which we will go into in a little bit, you're gonna see some of these stats you literally double dip. Like this ability right here, you're getting melee and throwing damage, flat damage, and you're double dipping into both of those attack modifiers, or stats rather. So this is essentially how the class is played. Most of your damage will come from shadow daggers, and the synchronized strike not only gives you more of these umbral blades or shadow dagger opportunities, but it's also a big single target burst. When you're using your synchronized strike on a target, not only will it deal a lot of damage because you have 3 blades that spawn on top of the target, but also just the attack in general deals a lot of damage. And you're going to see that it consumes a lot of mana. Actually, you're going to see right here that consumes a lot of mana. Everything else, like my umbral blades, everything else, it doesn't really consume mana. So synchronized strike has no cooldown, so you're just going to really make sure that you are not completely out of mana in order to cast the rest of your abilities. So there is a little bit of emphasis on mana regen on this class, especially when you start pushing upper levels, or this build rather, and there is a certain level of mana management because you can go negative. And if you see right here, I'm -60. I cannot use any movement skills while I'm in negative mana, and once it goes back to positive, then I can use my skills again. So obviously a 13 mana cost, that's regenning quite fast. So this is really the only skill you have to worry about when it comes to mana. So you really want to make sure you're not putting yourself into dangerous situations. These next 3 skills are utility skills. This shift goes without saying. You're invulnerable when you're using it, when you're spec'd properly, and it gives you movement on short cooldown. Extremely important. You also have your decoy. This is also really important, especially the higher up you get. This puts down a decoy totem there, and it essentially lures the mobs to it, so you take off a little bit of heat. You can group monsters, bosses, whatever that may be. Just a really, really good skill, and we don't even have to spec anything into it. The last thing is smoke bomb, and this is a lingering AoE that will give you buffs. As you can see, increases my melee and throwing damage. I also get added survivability with glancing blow and dodge rating as well. Again, assuming that you're spec'd correctly, and this is just a fantastic skill that not only boosts it just boosts everything across the board, movement speed, damage taken, and damage output, all that stuff. And you've got some pretty good uptime on it as well. It does have a cooldown, however, that along with decoy, these are your 2 cooldown skills outside of shift, which is a very low one. And this is just essentially how the classes play. We'll probably pull up some game footage if we haven't already, showing you just a general feel for how the class plays. damages, but you're going to notice that you're always on the move. That's what it is. You're always on the move. It's fantastic for getting mobs to chase you and leaving blades behind you so that they just sit in it or they get pulled into it. It's really good for grouping up targets around a decoy where you can synchronize strike, shift out, and then keep your blades on top of the mobs. This is a class where you can constantly attack either at melee range or in the perimeter, especially in the late game for sure. In the perimeter, it just has a lot of survivability simply because not only do you get damage reduction, not only do you have buffs that you can apply, but you also have a very high evasion rate with dodge, and you're always moving. That's the thing. You're always, in these types of games, you're going to always take less damage simply by not being in range or being out of telegraphs. So very, very powerful class, very well-rounded, tanky, deals a lot of damage, mobile, all that good stuff. So let's go over the actual skill tree now. What abilities we're going to be going into. Now, we're not going to be talking about every single ability here. I'm just going to go over the main important ones. Umbral Blades being obviously the bread and butter here. You got to take this. This is what's going to have those spinning blades that you saw earlier that will proc the shadow daggers, or a lot of the shadow daggers that you get. So we're going to obviously go to the left here first. You're going to pick up sword thrower here and then just immediately pick up the lethal darkness node. That's going to give you the shadow daggers. After that, you can take this all the way down to the left side here. The loathing is going to allow the blade storms to follow targets, and then you also want to pick up precision cuts. Precision cuts will allow the blades to stop on your cursor. So for example, my mouse is here, the blade stops here. If I don't have that ability, the blade is going to go all the way to the end of the screen, and it can be kind of a little bit wonky. So, and then we're going to take Edge of Obscurity into Umbral Remnant. Umbral Remnant is going to allow you to leave behind an Umbral Blade when you have a shadow. So mainly this ability right here, you're going to see that those spawn little Umbral Blades at the end of the duration of the shadows. Sorry, that comes from Umbral Remnant. And then you're also going to pick up Twilight Assault, which gives you a third blade that you can have before they are recalled. Pretty self-explanatory there. Next, we're going to go over Shift, and Shift, we're going to take Velocity first, and then we're going to go down to Momentum. This is really, really important. You want to max this out. This gives us movement speed after we use Shift there. As you can see, my movement speed is 44% base, and then after using it, I'm at 94%, and we're using this a lot. Very, 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 very high uptime on this ability. So that's really important, and obviously we get more movement speed procs from other things in the build as well. So definitely want to take that. We're going to take Swift Recovery. This gives us a little bit of mana, and that is mainly being taken for Shadow Slip. You are invulnerable to shifting. Now, this might feel a little bit less important in soft core, especially during the early segments or early leg of your run, but I can assure you in hardcore, especially towards the end game when you're pushing corruption, this is insanely important, because there's going to be a lot of moments where you just kind of go in like this and then you want to quickly get out, and you just need that extra layer of protection, because getting one shot is definitely a thing. I take this all the way to Elusive, which gives you additional dodge chance per point. Now, additional dodge rating, a lot of your survivability does come from dodge, but we get a lot of dodge from not only our gear, but also passives and things in the skill tree. So this is something that I would give a little leniency to. If you want to drop this and maybe go into hidden blades or more slow here, I can totally see that. That would probably be the next thing that I adjust with my build now that I've hit 100. And then I've taken the rest of the points up to here, which gives me Unseen Strike. Now, Max Roll has you go into Consume Shadow, which allows you to essentially execute targets on low health, but I didn't really find this to be like super value, so I tried to take it into Low Blow, which I don't have enough stat points for. And if you can get additional seconds on this, like 3 seconds slow, this is actually really good, because later on when you're mapping, you're moving around, and you obviously have a lot of movement speed, but being able to apply slow on targets just increases that survivability quite a bit, especially if for whatever reason your movement speed is a little low, maybe because you don't don't have the right affixes set up yet. And obviously for full damage, you can go into Hidden Blades, which gives you additional Shadow Dagger procs. And honestly, I'd rather go into Hidden Blades, which I did originally in softcore during my nine-day training session, over Consumed Shadow. I would probably go into Hidden Blades over Consumed Shadow there. So that's pretty much going to do it for shift. Oh, and sorry, this is actually the most important offensive one, which would be Lasting Presence into Dancing Shadows. This gives you a Shadow Cascade, and you're going to notice that we don't actually have this ability, Shadow Cascade, on the bar. And the reason why we don't is because we're actually proccing this ability and the effects from that ability from other things. For example, shift. You can see those little daggers that kind of explode out. That the daggers coming from the Shadow Cascade. That little explosion is essentially the Shadow Cascade that's proccing, and it's right here. After using shift, you use Shadow Cascade. So that will lead us to Shadow Cascade itself. And this ability right here, we immediately go for the Shadow Daggers. Shadow Daggers is obviously all of our damage, right? So this ability, those explosions, they're going to give you better uptime, more applications of Shadow Dagger here. And we want to also take the Dagger Dance right here. Well, we get it on our way to Shadow Elegance, or the Shadow Daggers here. But this also throws the piercing daggers that you see, those little red things that kind of spread across the screen. That is the Dagger Dance proccing from Shadow Cascade, and that pierces through targets, giving you more applications of dagger on top of the damage, or Shadow Daggers on top of the damage that it's already applying. Outside of that, we're going to be picking up Dismantle, which allows that big AoE to shred armor, which is going to increase our damage, and it's also going to apply Frailty, which allows us to take reduced damage. And that, for my hardcore build, is extremely important, because for my hardcore build, I prioritized survivability over damage. You can easily make this build or class more glass cannony, where you're really nuking targets almost passively. You throw the blades down and just run around. But for me, I wanted to go more, obviously more tanky, because later on you can literally get one shot, to the point where like two abilities were almost one-shotting me, and I have like very, very high focused survivability. So outside of that, you're gonna take a fight into shadows that allows you to alleviate some pressure on your mana, and those are these two nodes down here. And the reason why we want to do that, the reason why we want to alleviate mana pressure, is mainly because of Synchronized Strike. And Synchronized Strike is like the big burst damage. You're gonna notice that your targets take a lot of damage, not only from your Shadow Dagger procs, but also when you use Synchronized Strike on the target. Like I said earlier, this consumes a lot of mana, though. It can be spammed as long as you have the mana. So this, we're going to immediately go into Umbrella Assassination. This gives Synchronized Strike the ability to apply Shadow Daggers on hit, which is all of our damage. That's a nuker. We definitely want to take that. We also want to go into Dynamics, max that out, because mana efficiency is a thing. You'll see more so why here in a second. We're going to take that down to Perfect Coordination. This allows the shadows to jump inwards towards the target rather than outwards, and this allows us to have more focused damage more effectively, I guess. Sorry, I could have phrased that better, but it's just easier to deal damage, especially for single target fights. You can see the shadows just spawn there, so it's really, really good, really important. It does increase the mana cost, however. Then we take the rest of the points into Dark Allies here, which allows us to create 2 additional shadows when we come in. So it's 2, and then we've got a total of 4 there. So this is also something that I highly recommend taking. More burst damage. However, you're going to see the mana cost is like doubled, 100% additional mana cost. So after taking this, you're going to immediately want to go to Dynamics and max the rest of those points out. And the rest of the points, you can take it into Crimson Storm. This gives us a little bit more damage reduction over when it comes to dots, but you're just getting additional physical shred chance with Razor Strikes here, which is really good. And Crimson Strike just gives us extra bleed chance, which, to be perfectly honest, if I were going to mess around with some points here, I would move this. This is more of a max roll thing. I'd have to look into this more. I don't feel like I'm getting maximum value out of utilizing Crimson Shroud, especially for hardcore. I feel like I'd almost rather put the points into Razor Strike for more physical shred chance, but I don't know. I haven't run the numbers there yet, and there are some other interesting options, but for now, this is what I went with. I went with Crimson Storm because that was the baseline go-to on the max roll side. So there's my take with synchronized strike, and really that's pretty much how I'm personally building this entire class when it comes to the skill tree. And I actually forgot to go over smoke bomb, so I'm adding this in later. But smoke bomb is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to max out lingering fumes here. This is obviously going to give us a longer duration on the smoke bomb. We're going to max out smoke blades. This gives us flat melee and throwing damage. Again, we're able to double dip in these stats. So this gives us a lot more damage, big damage buff when we're staying in our smoke bomb. I picked up a point into Blood Bandit. This was picked up earlier because I needed a little bit of leech in my build because I was lacking the leech. I didn't have the ring that gave me a leech, and the leech passive we didn't get until like later. So I did pick this up. I just never got around to taking it out, but this is a little bit more optional. I would recommend picking this up early and then maybe respecking later if you're lacking the leech. And then we take this into generosity. Obviously gives us a larger area, cover area for the smoke bomb, really important as well. Enfeeblement here, I picked this up because it gives us a little bit more survivability with the frailty that will reduce the damage dealt by targets there. But this isn't as good as what people think, simply because this is applied on the burst rather than being applied constantly while the smoke bomb is up. So you could probably actually do away with that. I went and picked up Shrouded in Darkness into Rapid Concealment. This is what gives us a little bit more survivability here. It gives us that Dusk Shroud. And lastly, we pick up the Thick Smoke, which gives us slow stacks right here. So this is pretty solid as well. Next, we're going to go into passives. You're going to notice that I do have an extra skill point here after hitting 100, but I'm going to leave that out just because for a lot of you guys, it is the journey to level 100. So let's go over this. First, you're going to start into the regular rogue tree right here. And you want to put in, well, you have to put in 20 points into this tree before you can start investing into any other tree. And honestly, you can really go about this however you want, especially if you're not racing. There are some passives that have more priority, especially for hardcore. So obviously focus on the more defensive ones early for hardcore. And some of these passives, just in general, you won't actually need or want to take if you're playing softcore. So to start with the regular passive tree here, we're picking up Swift Assassin, increases our attack speed and physical damage here. We're also taking Steady Hand. This gives us dex and health. We're taking Guile. I would recommend only putting 1 point into Guile. The reason why I went 7 points is because with my build, and again, when it comes to the itemization in this game, when it comes to the gearing, you just don't know because everything is random. And with my build setup, with what I had available to me, I was lacking poison resistance, and taking Guile here gives me 5% poison resistance per stat point, and that's why I took it to 7. But most builds will have this left at 1 because you're not really hurting for dodge rate either, but this is another application of dodge, or another area where you can pick up more dodge rate. And you're going to go into evasion. Evasion is one of our, this is probably our best defensive passive here, so you definitely want to max this out. You're going to not only get increased dodge rating, but you're also going to be taking reduced damage flat 20% while you're moving. And with this class, we're always moving, right? Like, you're literally leaving that down. You can't spawn anymore. You can get some extra damage through the synchronized strike, but you're not actually getting any more blades more than 3, right? So you're just always moving. So this is extremely important. Next, we're taking agility, maxing this out. We get haste on hit chance. This again increases our movement speed when this is landing. You're just going to essentially have almost perma haste as long as you have your blades out, which is also very, very good. We're going to take twin blade. This is going to obviously allow us to wield a sword or dagger in our offhand, so this is kind of mandatory. And the last thing we're going to go into is dodge and parry. This gives us extra dodge again, and glancing blow chance. Glancing blow chance is a mechanic in the game where we take 35% less damage when we receive a glancing blow. So it's like a chance proc. If something happens, when that happens, I take 35% less damage, TLDR. And this is pretty good because, especially for me, hardcore player, I'm trying to reduce damage. I'm trying not to get one shot. We're going to be taking dodge and parry here. After you invest 20 points into this tree, I would probably recommend putting the 20 points softcore, prioritizing swift assassin, one into guile, and then into the rest into evasion, picking up twin blade, and just these 4 nodes here, or 4 passives, that's going to unlock 20 points, and you can just come back to this tree later. Then you go into Bladedancer here. The first thing you're going to put points into is pursuit here. You can't take cloaking shadows. We're also going to take cloaking shadows, but I would probably take this later. But again, depending on your survivability, depending on hardcore, you could pick this up a little bit earlier, but we do eventually max this out. Pursuit here, we want to pick this up first because 5 points into pursuit, this gives us 8% movement speed, and movement speed with this build is extremely important, not only to map faster, not only to kite faster, but also to not take damage from quicker attack patterns from bosses or mobs. You're also going to get increased melee and throwing damage, which is great. Once you can open the once passive, you want to full send this. Not only are you getting a little dodge rating if hit recently, but you're mainly taking this because it's giving you flat damage, both melee and throwing, and Shadow Daggers double dips into both stats. So right here, plus 16, plus 16, I'm utilizing both of those. I'm not just getting plus 16, I'm getting plus 32 essentially in total, because I'm taking advantage of both of those multipliers. I'm not going to talk about how the damage bucket works, but just know that you're double dipping into both of those stats. Really good. Shroud of Dust, we also max this out. This gives us Dusk Shroud. Dusk Shroud is pretty solid because this gives us more applications of glancing blow, or more opportunities rather of it. And we go all the way to Asuvin's pack here. This gives us dodge rating. Well, first of all, I needed to pick up points in order to take all in, but I also want to prioritize more defensive nodes, and this is what it is. The damage increase while full 90% is pretty nice, considering this is a kiting build and I'm always going to be essentially full while I'm dealing damage, or I'm going to be full a lot of the time. But also we also get extra dodge there. Blood Dance is the higher prio in this midsection. This gives us a lot of leech damage, so we are going to sustain not only through some of the equipment pieces that we have that give us leech, but Blood Dance is also a big part of that. This is pretty huge. You want to max this out as early as possible, even through the campaign. I would highly recommend taking this as soon as possible. We're going to take Argent Veil here. This gives us access to Silver Shroud. Silver Shroud essentially being something that gives us 100 ward, again, more survivability. Really good. We're not going to max this out, however. We're going to go into Critical Eye, which gives us crit vulnerability and crit chance. As you know, we have 100% chance to crit with the Shadow Daggers, so we're only picking up 1 point into this, and that's only because we're trying to get all in. All in here gives us the critical strike multiplier up to 75%. That's a lot of damage. We definitely want to take that. The last thing that we go into here, not in any particular order, just last passive that we mentioned today in this video, is Hooked Blades. This is also really important. This gives us more armor shred chance, increased armor shred effect. Yeah, this is also extremely important. When it comes to the Bladedancer tree, this is pretty much what we're going for hardcore. And then for the Falconer tree, and yes, you can take points in the Falconer, you just can't go beyond this chain. I'm taking 8 points into Wilderness Scout, which gives us more health, more dodge rating, Outlander's Tenacity, which gives us a higher endurance threshold, and it gives us more dodge. And then also I've taken points into Stamina of the Rover, mainly because I didn't get that much mana regen for my gear affixes, so I had to pick it up somewhere else. And this gives me some nice mana regen, and it also gives me some nice mana gain whenever I dodge if I'm taking damage. Now, mana on dodge I feel like is a little bit less significant the higher you go, because the higher you go, you're just really trying your best not to take as much damage, because you're obviously prone to getting one shot. But obviously even at the end game, you're always getting pelted by range stuff, and this can proc pretty nicely. But mainly I was picking this up for the mana regen, and the extra dodge rating also helps. So you're going to notice that I'm getting a lot of dodge rating across the board, and you're going to see that reflected in my stats, which we're going to go over next here in a second. But this is essentially what's happening when it comes to the passives. So let's move on to the stat points here. So this is going to kind of tie into the equipment pieces that I have here as well, so we'll kind of categorize this in the same section. Resistances, general rule of thumb, even in softcore, you want to max out your resistances, maxing out being 75%. I have overcap some of these resistances simply because, again, I'm playing hardcore. I don't want to get one shot, and there is penetration to resistances that the mobs can apply, debuffs essentially, and I want to take minimal damage. So I want to make sure, even with the debuffs, I'm at 75%, and any percent past 75% isn't going to reduce your damage anymore. It's simply going to offset the ignore resist debuff that you can have, and I believe that's up to a maximum of 15% that you can have applied to you. Fact check me on that. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what my chat told me, and I'm inclined to believe them. So we have our resistances here, and if you look at my build out, I have a lot of HP and I have a lot of endurance, and what I've done for my hardcore build is I prioritized, again, more survivability by really pushing my health as high as possible. I picked up endurance where I could, versus a softcore build. You don't really pick up endurance. You don't go out of your way to pick it up. You get it based off of the item pieces that come with your class, as well as passives that you pick up, but you don't really go out of your way to spec for it. And also movement speed to allow myself to really kite as well as possible. So dodge rating is also insanely high, and I try to pick up as much armor and dodge as possible as well. Stun avoidance is fairly high as well. So my whole goal, again, with hardcore is to really just shift my focus more towards surviving, and I'm able to do that also because Shadow Daggers is just insanely strong. It recently got nerfed before the 1.0 patch, or going into the 1.0 patch, and even then it's just really strong. It deals a lot of damage, and I don't know, I've heard things like Falconer deal more damage, like insane amounts, but I can assure you that the Shadow Dagger damage is good enough, especially with me going more into a essentially tank-like build when it comes to this class, right? So we've got our resistances that you want to hit 75% across the board. You want to really prioritize health. You're getting a lot of dodge, so you don't have to go out of your way to get extra dodge from your affixes an incredible amount. Like you can kind of chill on it, especially if you have Smoke Weaver, which we'll talk about here in a second. But most of your dodge is coming from your passives and your abilities, like your buff right here. You can see this when I have my smoke bomb up. This is going to take me up to 55%. I don't know why that one did go up to 55 on something that's not proccing here, but that usually goes like 50 to 55% dodge rate there, which is really high. And there's also diminishing returns with armor and dodge, so keep that in mind as well. The defensive stats here, we also want to make sure we get 100% crit avoidance. This is going to allow us to just never get crit. There is no ignore crit avoidance stat here. You're just never going to get crit if you have this at 100%, and you pick that up through your blessings, and you also pick that up through your gear affixes as well. For me, I have pretty high endurance. My endurance threshold is 1229, which is almost half of my HP bar, and I have a 55% endurance rate. Now, what endurance is, it essentially allows me to take 55% reduced damage for any damage I take under 1229 HP. So endurance threshold raises that bar, and endurance raises the amount of damage reduction that I get. That's also something that I wanted to prioritize a little bit more than usual, a little bit more than other people, simply because I'm trying to survive. Stat point wise, dex is your main stat. A lot of your damage, all of your damage scales off of dex, but it also again gives you dodge rating. Another thing that is useful to pick up, strength gives you 4% armor. That's pretty nice for flat damage reduction through your armor right here. Again, this has diminishing returns, but you're gonna see armor is only 70% as effective against non-physical damage. Armor here obviously reduces the damage that you take, so this is also very important, and you get that through strength. This is something that I would not go out of my way to pick up. If you're rolling affixes on something and it rolls strength, right here, this ring has +3 strength. This is not a throwaway for me because I can still, it's not a complete waste. And believe me, there are going to be some affixes that you have on your gear that aren't necessarily what you're looking for. So strength, I have a few points into that, but I'm not looking for strength. Not terrible because it gives armor. Vitality, I have some points into vitality simply because not only gives me health, but it also also gives me 1% per point poison and necrotic resistance. Fire, lightning, cold, this is also elemental resistance. So when I pick up elemental resistance, I get resistance across all three of these. Physical obviously is in its own thing, and you're really trying to make sure you have enough physical and void. These two I would say are the most important. They're all important, but if I had to choose only two to take, it would be physical and void. Void you can get quite a bit through your idols. Poison and necrotic is linked to vitality. I picked up additional poison through my passives as I mentioned earlier, but I'm also picking up some poison and necrotic through my vitality stat, and the fact that it gives me as a hardcore player the most access to the most important overall stat, which is health. This is also a stat that I don't mind picking up as well. Now, before talking about the gear pieces specifically, this right here is a notepad document that I made for a previous video, and I'm just going to include this in this video because this is essentially a TLDR summary of the affixes and stats that you want to prioritize. Implicits right here, we want to take a katana, and we also want to take a Chris, which I'm going to mention here in a second. But when it comes to the damage affixes, we want to take flat damage, percentage damage relative to your stats. So in our case, physical damage, throwing attack damage, both those things work. Melee damage, those things all scale for us in our shadow dagger, and that goes for flat damage as well. Skill specific affixes, which you can get from your idols additionally, and that for us is the physical penetration with shadow daggers here. We can get this on our chest, we can get this on our helmet. Shred penetration, we can also get this on our idols as well as the affixes. You can see here, this katana here gives us 174% chance to shred armor on hit, also a very good affix that we're looking for. Defense affixes, we're going for obviously resistance. We want to make sure that this is 75%, and you're going to have to just try your best to manage this because there are implicits that have set resistances. You're going to have idols that have HP linked with elemental or a specific resistance, and it's literally impossible for me to tell you exactly how you're going to get 75% across the board. Not even Maxroll can tell you. You're going to have to figure that out on your own. Health is obviously the most important one here on top of resistances, and we want to go percentage priority over flat. Hybrid health being the number one. Hybrid health, you can see here it says plus 15 health and 3% increased health. That's hybrid health. 114 health, that's flat health, and you're going to see the percentage health right here, 11% increased health. That's the percentage health. So the prio goes hybrid health, percentage, and then flat. For this specific build, we're going to be taking armor and dodge. We're also going to make sure we're trying to get crit avoid. Now you can get crit avoid. We're not going to take reduced damage taken from crits for this. We're taking crit avoid. Crit avoid you can get from your blessings. Okay, from this blessing right here, you're going to see that I actually got a couple of elemental right here. From this blessing here, I was able to get 38% critical strike avoidance, which means that I don't have to pick up as much, and I just picked up the rest of it through my gloves right here. 58% right here and 9% in my belt. I might have one more area, but I have it in my belt and I have it in my gloves right here. So 100% crit avoidance is very, very important. And then also endurance glancing. Glancing, there's an affix for glancing, but it's the glancing affix is specific to rogues, and it gives you HP on glancing, and we don't want that. So we really don't want that. Affix wise, we do want to take some endurance. You can see that I have endurance threshold here on my helmet. I believe I have endurance somewhere else, 15% endurance there as well. Again, softcore, you're not going to really go out of your way to prioritize this as an affix, but if you get it, since there's no guarantee, there's no full control over every piece of gear that you have, this is definitely something that you can keep as well. Other important affixes is a leech. A big part of our sustain with this class is leech. Not only are we getting it from the passive, but we're also getting it from our gear piece, mainly from our katana. We're getting 9% melee damage leech as health from our katana. Siphon of Anguish, I forgot to mention it because I don't have it equipped and I didn't use it to my journey to 100 because I couldn't fit it into my build by the time I got it. But Siphon of Anguish gives us a lot of leech. You're going to see here I get movement speed, and I also get extra leech. So a lot of your leech is coming from not only your passive, but you're also getting it from Siphon here as well. So like I said, the same applies where this build with what I was going for, the danger of one-shotting, I think that leech had a little bit less value compared to endurance, so I was okay with the lower leech rate that I personally had. But generally speaking, you would still take Siphon of Anguish, this unique, if you have it, which gives you a lot of leech. In fact, if you are fortunate enough to get this early, then you really have a lot more sustain getting to level 100. So this is also pretty important. And we're also getting it from our passive here, Blood Dance here as well. Now I could go a little bit more with leech. However, for me, with hardcore, with the amount of dodge, defenses, endurance I have, I don't have a difficult time getting back to 100. In fact, towards the end game with hardcore, I'm either always at 100 or very close to 100, or the threat is getting one shot, right? So leech, for me, I prioritize a little bit less compared to, like, let's say endurance, because I don't want to get one shot. The danger in the end game with hardcore, with my class at least, was the one-shot mechanic. Leech, when it comes to the prio order, I have it personally under endurance, specifically for hardcore. For softcore, different story, definitely different, but generally speaking, leech is still very, very important, and we want to make sure we take it. I just realized I spelled this wrong this entire time, so yeah, so we do want to take leech. It is important. We want it to better sustain, but TLDR, hardcore, I kind of wanted to prioritize endurance over it, so we went that route. Main attribute stat, so mainly dex. Movement speed is imperative. You want to make sure you have double movement speed on your boots here. You got movement speed affix, and then I also have an implicit 16% there that gives me movement speed as well. We want to max that out, like, for sure. You want to try and shoot for at least like 50%. You can see that I'm a little bit low. I'm only like 44%, but I've also picked up a lot of movement speed through haste applications. So even though it says 44%, I'm usually zooming, and honestly, it's kind of enough if you build the character the way I have. Mana recovery and cooldown recovery, we don't want cooldown recovery. We don't really need that, but mana recovery is a big thing for this build towards the later game. In the early game, it really doesn't matter that much because you're just going to be burning everything with shadow daggers. But later on, when things get tankier, especially in hardcore, where you're not full sending damage, you need to get some damage out of your synchronized strike. And let me tell you, if you do not have sufficient mana regen, or any for that matter, this is going to be very difficult to use. You will not use this very, very often. Versus having mana regen, you're going to be able to use this and shift and back out constantly. You can see, like, I'm constantly using this right here, right? As these are exploding, I get a little surge of mana, and this allows me to have pretty good uptime on my synchronized strike, and that is going to boost your overall DPS significantly. Stat-wise, that's pretty much how it goes. When it comes to the actual pieces, I pretty much had a uniqueless journey all the way to level 100. I got Smoke Weaver as my first unique very late. This is really nice because it gives us so much dodge rating. You can see when I take this off, I'm at 18% dodge rating. When I put this on, I'm at 35. And believe me, there's like almost like a soft cap around 20%. It doesn't move a lot, and it's like you stack a bunch of dodge, and it's like your dodge percentage either won't change or it'll only go up like 1%. But having a Smoke Weaver that just instantly brings that up to 35%, you're gonna notice you're gonna dodge a lot more. So this is the only unique that I got, and even this you don't need. I got this way later, so I wasn't able to take full advantage of it, but it was certainly nice to have this, and also the cooldown for shift as well is really nice. So the other uniques that we want is we want a chest piece, Wings of Argentis. That chest piece is going to give us a 20% damage reduction. I'll actually pull it up here on max roll. This gives us a 20% less damage taken while moving, and as you can see, we move constantly. We're constantly moving. So having a flat 20% damage reduction there from that chest piece is absolutely amazing, especially for hardcore. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get it. You do get that here at the Monolith of Fate when you kill the final boss. The final boss here, the third boss here, has a chance to drop it, and that's the only way that you can get it from my understanding. The other third unique that this build requires is a Siphon of Anguish, and this gives us that leech that we were talking about earlier. Really, really nice. However, for me, I did not use this because this gives this gives me elemental resistance. And first of all, I wasn't going to sacrifice not only the health, but mainly the physical resistance that I have from this if I did so. As you can see, my physical resistance goes down to 42%. That's a no-go. And my other rank here, 24% elemental resistance and an additional 13% elemental from the implicit and 33%. This was also not going to replace that either because I'm not capped anymore. So I prioritized the HP and resistances, mainly resistances, over the leech, and I think that was the right play. I would recommend you guys doing that as well, assuming you guys are doing hardcore. Even in softcore, to be perfectly honest, I still think that you should always keep your resistances maxed. I guess you can make the argument with the 6% movement speed, but if you have as much a haste and movement speed I do, that's really not the biggest factor in the world. The other pieces here, if you don't have a dagger, we're going to be going with a Chris dagger. A Chris dagger here has a melee damage and critical strike multiplier implicit, and katanas for swords also gives us melee damage and critical strike multiplier implicit. Those are the stats at the very top. Those are the two weapon types that we want to go for, katana and Chris. At the end of the day, if you don't have that, that's fine, but I would highly recommend setting your loot filter to only show those weapons, and the rest is pretty self-explanatory, right? We're still going for the affixes that I mentioned earlier, and the rest of the gear pieces, I would say, really just depends on how you're building your resistances. Okay, so number one, the boots, I have cold resistance here and movement speed. I would recommend these because not only do I get cold resistance, but I also get movement speed. Now, there are also boots that give you armor and just movement speed. It doesn't give you the cold resistance. I think one of them gives you fire resistance. It doesn't matter. You need the fire resistance, you can pick that up. If you need the cold, you can pick this up. That doesn't really matter. So just make sure you're monitoring your resistances throughout your build. But when it comes to the boots, definitely want to have the movement speed implicit. When it comes to the armor, I went for armor and endurance because not only did I get a nice drop here with a 58% critical strike avoidance, but again, for me, for my hardcore, I'm trying to prioritize not getting one shot, and I wanted to do that by stacking some more endurance. The helmet here, I'm getting poison and fire resistance from this rogue helmet. I think this is pretty good, and again, I get more endurance. I have an endurance affix here. I am prioritizing the shadow dagger affix on both the helmet and chest because I can only get this affix on my gear outside of my totems here. I can only get this on my chest and helmet, so I have that there. And I have also movement speed with my belt because I just value a lot of movement speed with this. You don't have to do movement speed with the belt. Personally, I got a pretty good belt here, so that's what I went with. I went with the movement speed there. And if you look at all my affixes, you're going to really notice a big emphasis on survivability. I have a lot of health, hybrid health, defensive affixes that I've equipped, endurance, vitality there, and obviously I'm doing that because it's hardcore, and you can absolutely change those into more offensive affixes if you're playing softcore. Idols are the last thing that is on the list here, and for a hardcore, I've just gone full defensive. Softcore, you want to prioritize the HP, so 4% increased health here in this, and you could also, this is the best, this is hands down the best type of idol that you can get, which is flat health and increased health, the percentage here. Fortunately, I was only able to find one, so the rest of those are actually two rather. I have another one here, and the rest of those were the elemental resistance, which is also pretty close to this because we want resistances as well. You're picking up a lot of your resistances. You're going to notice void resistance. That is also something that I've taken twice because I was lacking void, but HP is the highest priority with the idols, and then the next is your resistances. That's pretty much all I did. For a softcore build, I would highly recommend taking at least 2 shred. I believe you can get, let me pull up the max roll again. Idols here, you can pick up 2 that have increased shred armor effect, physical damage, physical penetration with shadow daggers. As you can see, max roll went with 4 offensive affixes on their idols, 2 shred armors, and 2 physical penetration with shadow daggers. This is something that I would highly recommend doing if you are playing softcore. However, hardcore, I didn't want to die, so I full sent it with just HP, and you can absolutely do that because shadow daggers just really juices, especially if you go more offensive on your affixes with your gear. So as you can see, my personal build, I've just gone really defensive. Obviously very fortunate that shadow daggers deals enough damage. It deals plenty of damage to get to 100 hardcore, so that's that's what I did. I went full health and resistances on my idols and prioritized the defensive affixes on my gear and picked up some offensive affixes when I could, especially if they came along with it. The big offensive ones being obviously flat damage, increased damage, and multiplier, ignore, shred, penetrate, those ones there. So that's pretty much it. If you guys thought that was helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know what class you want me to dive into next, because I am looking forward to playing another class. I'm kind of caught between whether I want to push corruption on the hardcore character or if I want to just mess around with other classes and builds and put out more build videos. But yeah, I wanted to get this video out because you guys have been asking me quite a bit for my hardcore build and what I was running. And I didn't want to, originally I was going to make like a very quick TLDR version of it. But you know what? It was my first level 100 / hardcore character. And I figured, you know what? Let's make it a little bit longer and be a little bit more detailed and give you more insights. So I do apologize if it was a little ranty. Hopefully the editor can cut it up so that it's a little bit more digestible. But let me know, and you can let me know this in the comment section below. Do you prefer shorter form, more straight to the point videos, or do you enjoy having these longer explanations and more specific details when it comes to specifically builds and stuff like that? So maybe you guys can share your thoughts on that. But yeah, as far as this video goes, I'm going to round it out here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Easy. Too easy.